On a cold, foggy night in the English moors, a man ran for his life. Behind him echoed a sound no human could mistake, a deep, terrifying howl, not of this world. This was the night Sir Charles Baskerville died, and some say the beast that killed him still hunts. This is the story of the Hound of the Baskervilles, a mystery where legend and logic collide, and where even Sherlock Holmes faces something seemingly supernatural. Dr. James Mortimer arrives in London with a strange tale. The Baskerville family, he says, is cursed. Generations ago, a cruel man named Hugo Baskerville chased a young woman across the moor. But before he could claim his victim, a gigantic demonic hound appeared and tore Hugo to pieces. Since then, the legend has lived on. The story begins in London, in the well-known rooms of Sherlock Holmes at Baker Street. It is a quiet morning, and Holmes and Dr. Watson are examining a walking stick that has been left behind by a visitor. To Watson, it seems like an ordinary object, but to Holmes, it is full of clues. By studying the wear on the stick, the engraving, and even the type of wood, Holmes concludes that the owner is a country doctor, respected in his field, and someone who has spent a lot of time walking in rural areas. Not long after, the owner returns. His name is Dr. James Mortimer, and he has come to consult Sherlock Holmes about a strange and troubling matter. He brings with him not only concern, but also an old manuscript that has been passed down through the Baskerville family for generations. Mortimer explains that the document contains a dark legend, a curse that has haunted the Baskervilles for centuries. He begins to read. The manuscript tells the story of Hugo Baskerville, a man known for his cruelty and wild behavior. One night, Hugo became obsessed with a young woman from a nearby village. He kidnapped her and brought her to Baskerville Hall, imprisoning her inside the estate. However, the woman managed to escape while Hugo was distracted. When Hugo discovered her absence, he was filled with rage. Without hesitation, he gathered his companions, mounted his horse, and chased after her across the moor. The moor was a vast and dangerous place, covered in fog and filled with hidden dangers. Few people dared to cross it at night. Hours later, Hugo's friends followed his trail. What they found was horrifying. The young woman lay dead from exhaustion and fear. Nearby, they discovered Hugo Baskerville, but he was no longer alive. His throat had been torn open. And standing over his body, according to the witnesses, was a gigantic black hound with glowing eyes, far larger than any natural dog. The sight was so terrifying that one of the men died from fear and the others fled in panic. From that moment on, the Baskerville family believed they were cursed by a supernatural creature, a hellish hound that would bring death to any member of the family who dared to walk the moor at night. After finishing the manuscript, Dr. Mortimer explains why he has come to Holmes. The legend, he says, may not be just a story. Recently, Sir Charles Baskerville, the latest head of the family, died under mysterious circumstances. Sir Charles had been a wealthy and generous man, known for his kindness. However, he was deeply affected by the family legend. He believed in the curse and lived in constant fear of it. He avoided going out onto the moor after dark and was often seen walking nervously near a gate that led to the open land. One night, Sir Charles went out for his usual walk. The next morning, he was found dead. There were no visible injuries on his body, but his face showed a look of extreme terror. It was clear that he had died in fear. At first, it seemed like a natural death, perhaps caused by a weak heart, but Dr. Mortimer reveals one detail that he kept secret from others. Near the body, he saw footprints. Not human footprints, but the prints of a large hound. Holmes listens carefully. While he finds the story fascinating, he remains skeptical. He does not believe in supernatural explanations. In his mind, every mystery has a logical answer, no matter how strange it appears. At this point, Mortimer introduces another important matter. There is a new heir to the Baskerville estate, Sir Henry Baskerville, the last surviving member of the family. He is arriving in London from Canada and plans to take possession of Baskerville Hall. Mortimer is concerned that if the curse is real, Sir Henry's life may be in danger. Holmes agrees to take the case. When Sir Henry arrives, he appears confident and practical. He listens to the story, but does not seem overly frightened. However, strange events begin to happen almost immediately. Sir Henry receives an anonymous letter. The words are cut out from a newspaper and pasted together. The message warns him to stay away from the moor. It is clear that someone is trying to frighten him or protect him. Soon after, one of Sir Henry's boots goes missing from his hotel room. At first, it seems like a trivial matter, but Holmes takes it seriously. The disappearance of a single boot suggests something deliberate. Someone wants Sir Henry's scent. Holmes begins to suspect that a real and dangerous plan is unfolding. Despite the risks, Sir Henry decides to go to Baskerville Hall. Holmes advises him to proceed, but sends Dr. Watson along to accompany him and report everything that happens. Holmes himself remains in London, or so it seems. Watson and Sir Henry travel to the countryside. As they approach Baskerville Hall, the atmosphere changes. The land becomes wild and empty. The moor stretches endlessly, covered in mist and shadow. It is a place that feels both beautiful and threatening. Baskerville Hall itself is an old and imposing building. Its long corridors, dim lighting, and isolated location create a sense of unease. The servants, Mr. and Mrs. Barrymore, appear loyal but nervous. There is something about the house that feels unsettled. Soon after arriving, Watson begins to notice strange occurrences. At night, he hears the sound of a woman crying somewhere in the house. When he investigates, Mrs. Barrymore denies it, but Watson is not convinced. Outside, the moor seems alive with strange sounds. The wind moves across it in a way that almost resembles whispers, and sometimes, late at night, Watson hears a distant howl, deep, echoing, and unlike any ordinary animal. Watson also learns that an escaped convict is hiding somewhere on the moor. This man is dangerous and desperate, and his presence adds to the tension. It is possible that he could be responsible for some of the strange events. As Watson continues his investigation, he meets several neighbors. Among them is Mr. Stapleton, a naturalist who studies the plants and animals of the moor. He seems friendly and helpful, but there is something unusual about him. He lives with a woman he introduces as his sister. At one point, the woman secretly approaches Sir Henry and urgently warns him to leave the area. She seems genuinely frightened. However, when questioned later, she denies ever giving such a warning. This contradiction adds to the mystery. Watson also discovers that Barrymore, the butler, has been signaling out into the moor using a candle at night. When confronted, Barrymore confesses that he has been helping the escaped convict, who is actually Mrs. Barrymore's brother. They have been giving him food and assistance. Although this explains some of the suspicious behavior, it does not explain everything. The mystery of the hound remains unsolved. One day, while exploring the moor, Watson spots a mysterious figure standing on a distant hill. The figure disappears before he can approach. This raises new questions. Who else is out there? Eventually, Watson discovers the truth. The mysterious figure is Sherlock Holmes himself. Holmes has secretly come to the moor and has been observing the situation without revealing his presence. He now shares his conclusions. The escaped convict is not the real danger. The true threat is much more intelligent and deliberate. All evidence points to Mr. Stapleton. Holmes reveals that Stapleton is not who he claims to be. He is actually a member of the Baskerville family using a false identity. His goal is to eliminate Sir Henry and claim the inheritance for himself.
To achieve this, Stapleton has taken advantage of the old legend. He has created a plan that combines fear, deception, and careful planning. He has obtained a large and powerful hound. He has trained it to be aggressive and dangerous. Then, to make it appear supernatural, he used a special chemical to make the hound glow in the dark. When seen at night, the creature appears monstrous, like something from a nightmare. Sir Charles, already frightened by the legend, likely died from shock when he encountered the glowing beast. Now, Stapleton plans to use the same method on Sir Henry. Holmes devises a plan to stop him. They arrange for Sir Henry to act as bait. He will walk alone across the moor at night, while Holmes and Watson hide nearby, ready to intervene. The night of the plan arrives. The air is thick with fog and visibility is low. Sir Henry walks alone, trying to remain calm. Suddenly, the silence is broken by a terrifying sound. A howl. It echoes across the moor, growing louder and closer. Out of the fog emerges the hound. It is enormous, its body glowing faintly in the darkness. Its eyes shine with a terrifying intensity. It charges towards Sir Henry. At the last moment, Holmes and Watson step forward and fire their weapons. After several shots, the hound collapses and dies. The threat is finally revealed and destroyed. Stapleton, realizing that his plan has failed, attempts to escape. He runs into the moor, heading toward the dangerous swamp known as Grimpen Mire. The area is treacherous, and without proper knowledge, it is easy to get lost. Stapleton disappears into the mire and is never seen again. It is believed that he perished in the swamp. In the end, the mystery is solved. There was no supernatural curse. The legend was used as a tool to create fear and confusion. Holmes reflects on the case, noting that fear can be as powerful as any physical weapon. Sir Charles did not die from an attack, but from terror itself. Sir Henry survives, though he is deeply shaken by the experience. The Baskerville estate is safe once more. Yet the moor remains unchanged, vast, silent, and filled with mystery. And for those who walk there alone at night, it is easy to imagine that somewhere in the distance, a hound is still howling. And sometimes, those who hear it don't speak about it again. There are stories, quiet ones, rarely told, of travelers who crossed the moor long after the Baskerville case was closed. Men who didn't believe in legends, men who laughed at the idea of curses, until they spent a night there, alone. One such traveler, a surveyor mapping the land, was said to have camped near the edge of Grimpen Mire. He had no interest in old stories. To him, the moor was just land, empty, silent, harmless. But sometime during the night, something changed. He later claimed that he woke to a sound. At first, he thought it was the wind. Then he realized it wasn't. It had rhythm, breathing, heavy, slow, deliberate, as if something large was moving just beyond the fog. He stayed perfectly still inside his tent, listening. Then came the howl. Not distant this time, close, too close, the kind of sound that doesn't echo outward but presses inward, like it's meant for you alone. The next morning, he was found miles from his camp, barefoot, disoriented, and when questioned, he refused to speak about what happened. He left the area the same day and never returned. There are other stories too. Farmers who claimed their animals refused to go near certain parts of the moor. Travelers who swore they saw movement in the fog, something low to the ground, pacing, watching, and then disappearing the moment they tried to focus on it. Of course, none of these stories were ever proven. Holmes himself would likely dismiss them all. He would say that fear lingers in places like that once a story takes root, the mind begins to fill in the gaps. And perhaps he would be right. Because the truth is, the hound that terrorized the Baskervilles was real, but it was just an animal, and it died that night. So whatever people claim to hear now, whatever moves in the fog, whatever lets out that distant hollow howl, it shouldn't exist. And yet, on certain nights when the air is still and the fog settles low across the ground, people say you can hear it again. Not loud, not constant, just once. A single drawn-out howl somewhere far off in the darkness. And if you hear it, the locals have one piece of advice. Don't follow it. Don't try to find where it came from, because the ones who did were never completely the same again. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not the legend, not the hound, but the idea that something we can't fully explain may still be out there, waiting, silent, hidden in the fog, listening for the next set of footsteps to cross the moor alone. Beyond that final step, the moor seemed to change. What had once appeared as an open stretch of land now felt enclosed, as though invisible walls had formed out of fog and silence. The air grew heavier with each passing moment, pressing down in a way that made breathing feel slightly more deliberate, more conscious. Even the ground beneath felt different, softer in places, uncertain in others, as if it no longer wished to be trusted. There was no clear boundary marking the shift, no visible line that separated safety from whatever lay deeper within. And yet, anyone who crossed far enough could feel it. A subtle awareness, an unshakable sense that something had begun to pay attention. The moor did not welcome intrusion, it endured it. Time moved strangely there. Minutes stretched longer than they should, while entire hours seemed to vanish without memory. The fog thickened without warning, rolling across the land in slow, deliberate waves, swallowing distant shapes until nothing remained but a narrow circle of visibility. And within that circle, the world felt smaller, quieter, too quiet. Natural sounds faded first, the rustling of grass, the distant movement of birds, even the whisper of wind. One by one they diminished until silence took their place. Not the peaceful kind, but something heavier, something that seemed to absorb rather than reflect. And it was within that silence that the first sensation usually appeared. Not sound, not sight, but awareness, a presence without form, something that did not reveal itself directly, but instead made itself known through absence, through the way the environment seemed to hold its breath. Those who had ventured far into the moor often described this moment in similar ways. A pause in the world, a stillness that felt intentional, as if the land itself had become alert. And then came the second change, movement. Not obvious at first, nothing that could be immediately identified, just subtle disturbances at the edge of perception. A shift in the fog, a slight change in the pattern of shadow, something that suggested motion without confirming it. It never appeared directly in front, always just beyond focus, just outside certainty, following, pacing, matching direction without closing distance. The ground played its part in the deception. Paths that seemed clear would slowly curve without notice, leading back toward the same locations again and again. Landmarks shifted or disappeared entirely. A rock that had once marked direction would no longer be where it had been. Orientation became unreliable. Confidence weakened. And with that, something else began to take hold. Doubt. Not immediate panic, but a gradual erosion of certainty. The quiet realization that control had been lost. That escape, if needed, might not be simple. It was during this stage that many began to notice the first sound. Not the howl, not yet. Something softer. A faint disturbance carried through the still air. too irregular to be wind, too distant to identify clearly. It came and went without pattern, leaving behind only uncertainty. The mind attempted to rationalize it. Natural explanations formed quickly: shifting terrain, distant animals, echoes from unseen sources. But the longer one remained, the less convincing those explanations became. Because the sound began to change. It gained rhythm, weight, a presence of its own. It no longer felt like part of the environment. It felt separate, intentional, and always positioned just beyond clear detection. The instinct to move faster often followed, to leave the area, to break free from the growing unease. But speed did not help. The terrain resisted urgency.
Soft ground slowed each step. Hidden dips and unstable surfaces forced caution, and no matter the direction chosen, the sensation remained. Unchanged, unaffected, still there, still present, watching. It was at this point that the fog would often thicken again, not gradually this time, but suddenly. Visibility reduced to only a few feet, shapes dissolved into nothing, the horizon vanished entirely, leaving no reference point, no sense of scale. Within that confinement, the world felt closer, too close. Every movement seemed louder, every breath more noticeable. The space around felt occupied, even when nothing could be seen. And then, finally, the sound came. Low, drawn out, impossible to mistake. The howl. It did not echo in the traditional sense. It did not bounce or fade naturally. Instead, it seemed to linger, stretching across the silence in a way that felt unnatural. Not distant, not near, but everywhere at once. The effect was immediate. The body reacted before the mind could process. Muscles tensed, breathing changed. Movement either stopped completely or became erratic, driven more by instinct than direction. Because the sound carried something beyond noise. It carried intent. Not the random call of an animal, not a territorial warning, but something focused, directed, as though it had been released with purpose. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it ended. Silence returned, heavier than before, more oppressive. Because now the unknown had form, not visible, but undeniable. Whatever had made that sound was real, and somewhere within the moor. From that moment forward, every second felt different. The environment no longer felt empty, it felt occupied. The subtle movements at the edge of perception became more frequent, more noticeable, less easy to dismiss. The sense of being followed grew stronger, more defined. Not approaching directly, not attacking, but maintaining distance, maintaining control, observing. The ground itself seemed to guide movement now, pulling unknowingly toward deeper sections of the moor, away from safe paths, away from known boundaries, toward areas where the fog lingered longer, where the silence felt thicker. And within those areas, the presence felt closer. Not seen, but felt, like a weight just outside reach. At times, the fog would thin briefly, offering glimpses of the surrounding land. Shapes would form, hills, stones, uneven ground, but never clearly enough to confirm safety. And within those brief moments of visibility, something else could sometimes be noticed. Marks, impressions in the ground. Large, deep, irregular. Not fresh, but not old either. As if something had passed through recently, something heavy, something powerful enough to leave its presence behind without needing to be seen. The fog would close again quickly, hiding those signs before they could be fully examined, and the silence would return. But it was no longer empty silence. It carried memory, evidence, proof that something had been there, and perhaps still was.
Time continued to distort. Movement became repetitive without awareness. Circles formed unknowingly. Land that had seemed new began to feel familiar in unsettling ways. The realization would come slowly, that leaving the moor was no longer a matter of direction, but of chance and perhaps permission. The howl did not return immediately. It did not need to. Its presence lingered in memory, echoing internally long after the sound itself had faded. Every shift in the environment, every subtle movement carried the possibility of its return, and that anticipation became its own form of control. Because the true weight of the moor was not in what could be seen or heard, but in what could be expected. The understanding that something might happen at any moment, without warning, without reason, without escape. And then, when the tension reached its highest point, when movement slowed, when awareness sharpened to its limit, the sound would come again. Closer, clearer, heavier, no longer distant, no longer uncertain. And in that moment, the realization would fully take hold, that whatever existed within the moor had no longer observing from afar. It had closed the distance, not completely, not visibly, but enough. Enough to be known, enough to be felt. And from there, the outcome became uncertain. Because some who entered the moor eventually found their way out, changed, silent, unwilling to describe what they had experienced, while others simply did not return at all, leaving behind only the empty land, the fog, and the quiet, unbroken stillness that followed, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had ever been there. Except for those rare nights when the air settled just right, and the silence deepened beyond comfort, and somewhere across that endless stretch of land, a sound would rise once more, low, slow, unmistakable, a reminder that the moor was never truly empty, and whatever moved within it had never needed to be seen to be real. Because reality in places like the moor does not depend on proof but on presence, and presence does not always require form. Those who leave such places often carry something with them, not just memory, but a lingering weight that doesn't fade with distance. Sleep becomes uneasy, silence feels heavier, and ordinary sounds begin to resemble something familiar, yet unexplainable. At times there is an unsettling stillness, a pause in the world that mirrors the same oppressive quiet once felt on the moor. The experience doesn't end when the land is left behind. Instead, it seems to follow in a way that is not physical, but deeply internal, as if some awareness has been established. Shadows appear deeper, empty spaces feel less empty, and the mind struggles to dismiss what it cannot fully understand. Some return to the moor, seeking answers, hoping to confront what they cannot explain. But even in daylight, when everything appears normal, something remains, a subtle pressure, an unspoken presence. And as night falls, the fog returns, the silence deepens, and the same sequence unfolds once more. The stillness, the awareness, the sense of movement, and eventually, the sound. A low, distant howl that never truly changes, as if it exists beyond time. Those who experience it begin to realize that it is not random, it doesn't simply happen, it responds. The deeper one goes, the stronger it feels, as though the very act of being there is acknowledged. The moor itself never changes, but those who cross it do, because some experiences do not end. They continue quietly, existing beneath the surface of everyday life, waiting not to be seen, but to be recognized. And in rare moments, when everything falls unnaturally silent, there comes a subtle reminder, not quite fear, but something close, that some things do not need to be proven, seen, or understood to exist. They are already there, and perhaps they always have been.
Fragments of experience passed quietly from one person to another, each one slightly different, yet all carrying the same weight, the same feeling, the same unspoken certainty that something about the moor could not be reduced to logic alone. Over time, fewer people spoke about it, not because the stories disappeared, but because they settled. They became part of the land itself, woven into its silence, carried by the wind, hidden beneath the fog. Something understood without needing to be explained. The world moved on, as it always does. Roads were built farther away. Travelers chose safer paths. Maps marked the dangerous areas more clearly. And for most, the moor became just another place, distant, quiet, and easily ignored. But not entirely forgotten, because every so often, someone would still wander too far. Not intentionally, not recklessly, just one step beyond where they meant to go. And that was enough. Nothing dramatic would happen at first, no sudden danger, no immediate threat, just a change. A shift so subtle it could almost be dismissed. The air would grow heavier, the silence would deepen, and the feeling would return. That quiet awareness, that unmistakable sense that something had noticed. Those who recognized it early would turn back, quickly, without hesitation, and most of them would make it out, changed perhaps, unsettled, but safe. Others would wait too long, trying to understand it, trying to prove it, trying to convince themselves that it was nothing. And for them, the moor would not rush, it would not chase, it would not reveal itself all at once. It would simply wait. Because whatever existed there did not need speed, it did not need force, it did not need to be seen. It only needed time. Time for the silence to grow, time for doubt to settle, time for awareness to turn into certainty. And then, when the moment was right, when the distance was just enough, when the world had become quiet enough, the sound would come. Low, slow, unmistakable. A single howl. Not loud enough to call for help, not close enough to locate, just enough to be understood. And in that moment, everything would become clear. Not the truth, not the answer, but the realization that some things were never meant to be found, only experienced, only survived, or not. And long after the sound faded, long after the fog shifted and the silence returned, the moor would remain exactly as it always had been, still, empty, unchanged, as if nothing had ever happened. But for those who had heard it, truly heard it, the world would never feel the same again, because somewhere, far beyond sight, hidden in the endless stretch of land and shadow, something still moved, not searching, not hunting, just waiting for the next set of footsteps to cross the moor alone.
If you felt the weight of the moor and the echo of that howl, don't disappear into the silence. Subscribe and step back into the shadows with us. Every story is darker, every fear more real, and the next one is already out there, waiting for you.